Imagine a quiet Roman piazza at dusk. Not the bustling postcard image, but one where the laughter of children and the animated chatter of young adults have been replaced by a hushed stillness. The ornate fountains still flow, but their murmur now seems to underscore an absence, reflecting the ghostly glow of a few streetlights on cobblestones that once vibrated with life. Empty storefronts, their once proud displays now veiled by dust and fading for rent signs. Lined streets where ambitious young professionals once walked, heads held high, dreaming of the future they would build here. This is not fiction, it is consequence. Before we delve deeper, tell us in the comments, where are you watching this from right now? Your perspective helps us understand the global reach of these silent shifts. What you just witnessed is not a random snapshot, nor an isolated economic blip on the radar. It is a precise symptom, a visible scar etched onto the very soul of nations. We are about to unravel a profound truth. The sustained exodus of educated young generations from Southern Europe isn't merely a temporary economic fluctuation or some isolated aftermath of the 2008 crisis. No, it is the inevitable outcome, the logical endpoint, of a deeply entrenched economic and social model that systematically cannibalized its own future capacity for growth and self-renewal. Few speak of it with such stark clarity because confronting this reality means facing uncomfortable truths about structural betrayals and the quiet erosion of entire societies. To understand this present, you must first glimpse a past that promised permanence. For decades after World War II, Southern European nations embraced a trajectory of robust reconstruction and integration into the grand European project. This wasn't just about rebuilding, it was about forging a distinct social contract, a blueprint for life. Imagine a world where strong family networks acted as an unbreakable safety net, where the public sector readily absorbed bright graduates, offering stable careers, and where protected domestic industries provided reliable employment. This was a system that functioned, underpinned by a robust welfare state and the perceived unwavering security of the single currency, the euro. If you find yourself questioning what's truly happening behind the headlines, this channel consistently dives deeper into complex truths nobody fully explains. Consider subscribing to join a community that demands clarity. The implicit promise of this era was crystal clear, etched into every family's aspiration. Higher education was not just an ideal, but a guaranteed pathway. It meant stable, dignified career progression, not just anywhere, but specifically within your own national borders. This wasn't merely a hope, it was a societal compact, bolstered by the reassuring flow of EU structural funds. The collective illusion was powerful. This model, perhaps slower, less frenetic than its Northern European counterparts, was inherently resilient. It seemed capable of providing a baseline of security, upward mobility, and opportunity for every educated young person, ensuring the prosperity of each succeeding generation within their beloved homeland, indefinitely. Now, let us meet Sophia Rossi, a name that echoes millions of others. She is a 28-year-old architect from Rome, a woman who meticulously followed every step of that promised path. Her parents, a retired civil servant and a small business owner, instilled in her the unwavering belief that hard work, dedication, and a prestigious education would unlock a future of contribution and stability. Sophia didn't just attend university, she excelled, earning her degree with honors, mastering multiple languages, driven by an inherent pride in her chosen profession, and an eager anticipation of building a meaningful career in the vibrant heart of her own country. Sophia embodied the very essence of that societal compact. Her central human value was a profound, unshakable belief in meritocracy, in the rock-solid stability of her country, and in education's inherent power as a guaranteed route to a secure, dignified future right there at home. She envisioned not just a job, but a life, a family, a home, contributing her skills to the nation she loved. Yet, what she, and millions like her, couldn't perceive was the subtle, corrosive truth lurking beneath this veneer of predictability. That seemingly unshakable stability, that reliable blueprint for life, was in fact built upon a series of untested assumptions, fragile foundations that would soon confront the relentless hammer blows of a changing world. The year 2008 arrived not as a distant tremor, but a seismic shock wave that ripped through global finance, quickly morphing into the brutal Eurozone sovereign debt crisis by 2010. Suddenly, the stable ground beneath southern Europe began to fracture. Governments, facing immense pressure from powerful external forces, the European Commission, the Central Bank, the IMF, found themselves cornered. Their response, a package of severe austerity measures, was presented as an unavoidable necessity. This was not framed as a choice, but as the only rational path, the bitter medicine required to prevent outright sovereign default, stabilize public finances, and meticulously restore faith in the single currency, the euro. At the time, these decisions seemed undeniably correct, the responsible action to avert an even greater catastrophe. Yet, hidden within this seemingly logical framework was a profound structural error, an invisible flaw that would soon begin to unravel the entire fabric of society. The implementation was swift and unforgiving. Drastic cuts in public spending became commonplace, mirroring the freeze on public sector hiring that had once been a reliable avenue for graduates. Taxes climbed, squeezing an already strained populace. These were not mere adjustments. They were deep incisions, justified by the urgent need to rebalance national budgets. The narrative was clear. These sacrifices, however painful, were temporary. They were essential steps towards a leaner, more competitive economy, a necessary rite of passage before a return to prosperity. But this rationale sidestepped the deeper issue. It failed to address the inherent rigidities and the chronic lack of competitiveness that had long simmered beneath the surface of the Southern European economic model. The proposed cure, while seemingly logical on paper, paradoxically exacerbated the very weaknesses it claimed to heal, stifling domestic demand and disproportionately crushing the hopes of new entrants into the workforce. For Sophia, fresh from her architectural studies, the initial impact felt less like a systemic collapse and more like an unlucky turn of events. The once dependable public sector, a traditional employer for bright graduates, suddenly became a closed door. Private architectural firms, struggling under the weight of contracting demand and tightened credit, offered fewer opportunities, or worse, only precarious, unpaid internships. The robust social safety net, a bedrock of the Southern European model, started to show visible signs of fraying. She applied diligently, her portfolio gleaming with innovative designs, yet the responses were either non-existent or dishearteningly vague. She attributed it to a temporary downturn, a post-crisis hangover that would surely pass. This was just a phase, she reasoned, confident her exceptional qualifications would eventually cut through the noise. But the phase persisted, deepening into a pervasive reality. The economy contracted sharply, a chill wind sweeping through what were once bustling piazzas. Countless small businesses, the very backbone of local economies and potential employers for young professionals, were forced to shutter their doors, leaving behind a trail of faded, for rent signs. The initial, debt-fueled prosperity, which had created an illusion of stable growth, evaporated, replaced by a gnawing sense of precarity. The promise of a dignified future, once so tangible, began to crumble, replaced by a growing chasm between effort and reward. Sophia watched as her friends, equally qualified, faced similar dead ends, their youthful optimism slowly giving way to a quiet despair. The job market, far from recovering, seemed to be actively shrinking around them, leaving their ambitions nowhere to land. Does this resonate with challenges you've observed or even experienced yourself? Share your thoughts below. Understanding how seemingly rational decisions can cascade into profound, long-term consequences is crucial. Subscribe to ensure you don't miss our deep dives into the invisible forces shaping our world. The problem was not merely a scarcity of jobs, it was a fundamental dislocation, a mismatch of epic proportions. Highly skilled graduates, once considered the nation's most valuable asset, found themselves facing a stark choice. Accept precarious low-wage contracts with no benefits or career progression, or confront outright unemployment. The invisible erosion of the system became starkly palpable. Sophia, after countless applications and dispiriting interviews, realized her prestigious degree and multilingual fluency, once sources of immense pride, now seemed irrelevant. The jobs that did exist were a mockery of her aspirations, offering little more than subsistence wages and zero stability. Her initial optimism, once a fierce flame, flickered under the relentless gale of rejection, giving way to a profound, unsettling frustration. This was the insidious onset of Sophia's internal conflict. The rock-solid predictability she had been taught to expect, the unwavering stability of her country's social contract, shattered into fragments. Her diligent efforts, her academic excellence, her mastery of skills, all the pillars of meritocracy she believed in, were yielding no tangible return. It wasn't just a tough economy. It felt like a structural betrayal, a cruel trick played by the very system that had promised her so much. The chasm between her youthful expectations of building a life and career in Italy and the grim reality of perpetual precarity grew wider with each passing week. The system, once her guarantor of upward mobility, now stood as an impenetrable wall, refusing to deliver on its most fundamental promise. As Sophia navigated this barren landscape, the subtle outlines of the structural antagonists began to emerge, though she likely didn't name them as such. She saw older generations, protected by rigid labor laws, clinging to their stable positions, while she and her peers were shunted into a precarious, temporary workforce. The excessive bureaucracy, once a background hum, now felt like a suffocating blanket, stifling any new entrepreneurial ventures that might have created opportunities. The very fabric of the economy, designed for stability, proved utterly incapable of adaptation, of generating the dynamic growth needed to absorb its educated youth. This wasn't a cyclical downturn. This was a system refusing to evolve, its internal mechanisms seizing up, betraying the future it was meant to secure. The tension, once a low thrum of anxiety, now resonated with a sharper, more urgent tone. The initial crisis management, presented as a temporary necessity, had calcified into a sustained state of economic stagnation and social immobility. The promise of upward mobility, of a dignified and meaningful future within their homeland, had been systematically withdrawn from an entire generation. The blueprint for life that once seemed so solid, so reliably drawn, now looked like a faded, unachievable dream, a cruel mirage. For Sophia and millions like her, the realization dawned. The system was not merely struggling, it was failing its most ambitious, its most prepared citizens, condemning them to a future defined by uncertainty and the profound absence of opportunity. The initial cracks in Southern Europe's foundation appeared not with a bang, but a seductive whisper, the uncritical embrace of the euro. When these nations adopted the single currency in the early 2000s, they gained immediate access to cheaper credit, a seemingly endless tap of low-interest loans that fueled a temporary boom. You saw consumption soar, real estate markets inflate to dizzying heights, and public spending expand without restraint. This immediate surge in perceived prosperity, however, came at a hidden cost. It masked deep underlying productivity deficiencies, preventing any necessary structural reforms that might have built genuine competitiveness. The illusion was potent, a seemingly stable economic environment where everyone could borrow freely. Yet, beneath this veneer, a profound loss of monetary policy autonomy was taking root, leaving these economies dangerously vulnerable to external shocks, stripped of the ability to devalue their currency and regain competitiveness when the inevitable storm arrived. This debt-fueled prosperity, while initially creating a powerful illusion of stable growth, was a mirage for people like Sophia. The economy, rather than transforming into a dynamic engine of innovation, became structurally uncompetitive. Jobs, though seemingly plentiful, were often concentrated in less productive sectors, creating an artificial sense of security. Sophia, like so many of her peers, was born into this era, internalizing the belief that the system, though perhaps slow, was inherently reliable. The implicit promise was a life built on merit, where education guaranteed a dignified future within her cherished homeland. This collective conviction, however, was fundamentally flawed, resting on foundations that were silently eroding. It was a promise that would soon be brutally withdrawn, leaving a generation to confront the hollow echo of what should have been their future. Then came the seismic shockwave of 2008, swiftly followed by the Eurozone sovereign debt crisis from 2010 onwards. The era of cheap credit abruptly ended, replaced by an unforgiving imperative for fiscal discipline. Governments across Southern Europe, cornered and under intense pressure from the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, the notorious Troika, implemented a brutal regime of severe austerity measures. Drastic cuts in public spending became the norm, freezing the very public sector, hiring that had once been a reliable avenue for graduates like Sophia. Taxes climbed, crushing an already strained populace. These decisions, though presented as unavoidable necessities to prevent outright sovereign default, unleashed deep recessions, sent unemployment rates soaring, especially among the youth, and caused a catastrophic collapse of domestic demand, stifling any chance of recovery before it could even begin. The immediate effect was a sharp economic contraction, a chill wind sweeping through what were once bustling piazzas. But the accumulated consequence was far more insidious. Public services, starved of funding, began to visibly deteriorate, and the once robust social safety net, a bedrock of the Southern European model, frayed beyond recognition. This wasn't merely an economic downturn, it was an accelerating brain drain, a systemic hemorrhage. As domestic opportunities vanished, the most qualified, the most ambitious, the very individuals poised to drive future growth were compelled to seek their futures abroad. Sophia watched as friends, equally talented and driven, began packing their bags, their youthful optimism replaced by a quiet, determined desperation to escape a country that no longer seemed to want them. The nation was systematically depleting its own human capital, one brilliant mind at a time. The widespread despair was palpable, a silent scream echoing through countless homes. This was the birth of what became known as the Lost Generation. Highly educated individuals like Sophia deemed unemployable in their own countries. The promise of a dignified future, once so tangible, crumbled into dust, replaced by a growing chasm between effort and reward. Sophia, after countless applications, after polishing her portfolio until it gleamed, found her prestigious degree and multilingual fluency. Once sources of immense pride, now utterly irrelevant. The jobs that did exist were a cruel mockery of her aspirations, offering little more than subsistence wages and zero stability. Her initial optimism, once a fierce flame, flickered under the relentless gale of rejection, giving way to a profound, unsettling frustration. This wasn't just a tough market, this was a fundamental betrayal. Does this resonate with challenges you've observed or even experienced yourself? Share your thoughts below. Understanding how seemingly rational decisions can cascade into profound, long-term consequences is crucial. Subscribe to ensure you don't miss our deep dives into the invisible forces shaping our world. Yet, even as this crisis deepened, another structural antagonist persisted: the rigid labor market. Despite widespread calls for reform, governments largely maintained a deeply entrenched dual system. On one side, older, established workers enjoyed robust protections, making them difficult and expensive to dismiss. On the other, new entrants like Sophia were relegated to a precarious, temporary workforce, easily hired and just as easily let go. This wasn't an oversight. It was a deliberate, albeit short-sighted, political choice to preserve existing jobs for older generations. The immediate effect was a deeply segmented workforce, where youth bore the brunt of economic instability, trapped in a cycle of short-term contracts with no benefits, no career progression, and no pathway to stability. This policy, designed to protect, ultimately stifled an entire generation. The accumulated effect of this dual labor market was devastatingly clear. Young people found themselves trapped, their potential languishing in a cycle of precarious, low-wage employment, or worse, long-term unemployment. Businesses, facing prohibitively high firing costs for permanent staff, became inherently reluctant to invest in long-term hiring or innovation, further stifling growth. For Sophia, this meant the erosion of any real career prospects. The dream of financial independence, of a home, of starting a family, was pushed further and further into an unreachable future. This structural inertia, combined with excessive bureaucracy and disconnected political elites clinging to patronage networks, prevented the emergence of dynamic new businesses that could have absorbed the educated youth. It was a self-inflicted wound, crippling the very engine of future prosperity. This was the heart of Sophia's internal conflict, a shattering realization that the rock-solid predictability she had been taught to expect, the unwavering stability of her country's social contract, had splintered. Her diligent efforts, Her academic excellence, her mastery of skills, all the pillars of the meritocracy she believed in, were yielding no tangible return. It wasn't just a tough economy. It felt like a structural betrayal, a cruel trick played by the very system that had promised her so much. The chasm between her youthful expectations of building a life and career in Italy and the grim reality of perpetual precarity widened with each passing week. The system, once her guarantor of upward mobility, now stood as an impenetrable wall, a silent antagonist refusing to deliver on its most fundamental promise, leaving her to grapple with the agonizing question of her future. The decisive failure, the true point of no return, arrived between 2010 and 2015. This was the critical window when Southern European governments collectively failed to pivot from short-term crisis management and politically expedient inertia to fundamental, comprehensive structural reforms. They could have implemented bold changes, liberalizing labor markets, strategically investing in future-oriented industries, streamlining suffocating bureaucracies to foster entrepreneurship, and reforming public education. Simultaneously, they could have more aggressively advocated for a growth-oriented European response. Yet, these actions were not taken. Political expediency, fierce resistance from entrenched interest groups, unions, public sector, established businesses, and a deep-seated cultural preference for maintaining existing social contracts over embracing disruptive change, ensured inaction. The focus remained rigidly on fiscal consolidation, tragically ignoring the imperative for economic transformation. This was the moment the future was foreclosed. The cost of this lost opportunity was immense. The sacrifice of an entire generation's potential, creating a demographic and economic vacuum that will take decades to fill, if ever. From this point onward, with mass emigration already a sustained trend and public debt still cripplingly high, the ability to reverse the trajectory became severely constrained. The most dynamic and adaptable individuals, the very human capital needed for recovery, had already left, depleting the national pool of talent and innovation. Those who remained formed an older, less innovative population, burdened by an increasingly heavy welfare load. The traditional family and community support structures, once a source of resilience, began to buckle under the strain, overwhelmed by extreme demographic imbalances. The social contract, based on intergenerational solidarity, frayed beyond repair, sealing the fate of a region that had eaten its own future. You see it in the cold, hard decisions of global capital. Multinational corporations now consistently bypass Southern European nations for crucial R&D hubs and high-tech manufacturing, opting instead for regions with dynamic labor pools, streamlined regulations, and greater economic agility. They view Southern Europe as a market too stagnant, too rigid to foster innovation, a strategic withdrawal, not a temporary blip. Domestically, the very backbone of these economies, their small and medium-sized enterprises, are in a desperate, often losing struggle. They cannot secure the skilled labor they need, nor can they invest in vital modernization, trapped by contracting demand and stifling bureaucracy. This leads to a relentless wave of closures, widespread stagnation, or a forced outward migration of these businesses. The promise of indigenous growth, once vibrant, has been systematically drained, leaving empty shells of once thriving local economies, tangible proof of a future foreclosed. For individuals like Sophia, the statistics are a stark mirror. Eurostat and national agencies consistently report youth unemployment rates in southern Europe that remain stubbornly high, often double the EU average, even a decade after the crisis supposedly ended. This isn't just a number. It represents millions of lives stalled, ambitions derailed. Concurrently, emigration figures for educated individuals aged 25-39 have surged, reaching unprecedented levels across Greece, Italy, Spain, and Portugal. What were once temporary departures for a gap year or a learning experience have transformed into permanent resettlements, a final, heartbreaking decision. University graduates now routinely seek their first professional opportunities in Berlin, London, Dublin, or even outside Europe entirely, confirming the systemic, undeniable lack of domestic prospects. This is the silent exodus, draining the very lifeblood of a nation. Beyond the human stories, the economic indicators paint an equally grim picture. Economic reports consistently reveal a sustained decline in productivity growth across southern Europe, lagging significantly behind its northern European counterparts. This isn't a statistical anomaly. It signifies a fundamental inability to generate more value from existing resources. Average real wages for young workers have stagnated or even decreased, failing to keep pace with the rising cost of living, trapping them in financial fragility. Crucially, key innovation metrics, such as patents granted and R&D investment as a percentage of GDP, lag drastically behind other developed economies. This provides concrete, irrefutable evidence of a systemic failure to generate high-value economic activity, and, more critically, to retain the innovative talent essential for any future prosperity. The engine of progress has simply stalled. The everyday impact is felt directly in the quality of life. The average age of financial independence and first home ownership has dramatically increased, pushing young adults to live with their parents well into their 30s. This isn't a cultural choice, it's an economic necessity, eroding personal autonomy and delaying family formation, altering the very fabric of society. Public services, underfunded by prolonged austerity and an aging, shrinking tax base, show increasing signs of strain and deterioration, particularly in healthcare and education quality. This further erodes the social contract, diminishing the quality of life for those who remain, trapping them in a cycle of diminishing returns. The once vibrant promise of a good life at home has been systematically dismantled, piece by painful piece. If these profound structural shifts resonate with you, and you seek deeper understanding of the invisible forces shaping our world, consider subscribing. We consistently unravel complex truths, providing the clarity and context you need to navigate these evolving landscapes. Join our community and stay ahead of the next major unfolding story. If this trajectory persists, Southern Europe's future generations face a grim, almost irreversible inheritance. They will inhabit countries with significantly smaller, older, and less dynamic populations, confronting unsustainable tax burdens to support increasingly strained pension and healthcare systems. Opportunities for upward mobility within their home countries will be severely diminished. The very social fabric will weaken fundamentally from the continuous loss of youthful energy and entrepreneurial spirit, leading to a more conservative, risk-averse, and ultimately poorer society. Traditional family and community support structures, once resilient, will be overwhelmed by extreme demographic imbalances. The implicit social contract, based on intergenerational solidarity, will fray beyond repair, leaving a legacy of scarcity and decline. Globally, these nations risk being permanently relegated to the economic periphery within the European Union. Their role will shrink, primarily dependent on tourism and low-value services, rather than emerging as drivers of innovation, industrial powerhouses, or significant geopolitical actors. Their economic weight and demographic vitality will continue to diminish, rendering them more susceptible to external economic and political pressures, less able to shape their own destinies within the continent. The region's capacity for self-sustaining, high-value growth will be severely compromised. It will struggle to attract and retain the talent required to compete in knowledge-based global markets, leading to a long-term, irreversible erosion of economic and political relevance on both the European and global stages. This is the slow fade from the center stage of history. The Southern European experience serves as a stark, powerful lesson. It shows how deeply ingrained economic and social models, when confronted by global shifts and lacking political will for radical reform, can paradoxically consume their most valuable resource, their educated youth. It unequivocally reveals that short-term fiscal prudence, uncoupled from a visionary commitment to structural dynamism and opportunity creation, is not merely unsustainable, but profoundly self-destructive. This narrative transcends national borders, exposing a universal pattern. Societies failing to align substantial investments in human capital with genuine domestic economic opportunity, and whose systems privilege stasis and protectionism over adaptation and meritocracy, will inevitably face a talent drain that cripples their very future. This is a critical cautionary tale for any developed nation clinging to outdated structures in a rapidly evolving global economy. You should care because the slow, structural collapse of opportunity in Southern Europe, manifesting as a quiet, relentless exodus, is not merely a regional phenomenon, but a prescient warning. It illustrates the devastating human and societal cost when grand economic designs overlook the fundamental need for individuals to find purpose, progression, and a dignified future at home. This challenge could confront any developed nation failing to adapt to the relentless demands of the 21st century, a future where societies must choose between evolution and erosion. The choices made today echo for generations, shaping the very landscape of human potential inevitably.